So they got the deal over the line. What's in it?
Well, they got it over the line. They agree now to expedite the implementation of the arrangement that was agreed last summer between President Donald Trump and the head of the commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Just to bring our viewers up to speed with this deal, the tariffs on U.S. industrial goods will go down to zero. Tariffs on European imports heading to the U.S. would triple. At this stage, the really thrust of this issue is the European Parliament now gives the approval, the consent to move on and go ahead with the implementation. They do this in a context in which the president of the U.S. had threatened to double tariffs on European cars by July the 4th. That is, of course, America's Independence Day if this did not happen. What the European Parliament agrees now is that this will put the relationship on a more stable footing. That is questionable, of course, given the context between the U.S., the Trump presidency, and Brussels. And they also say, which is put together in this arrangement that we have now cut yesterday at about 2:30 in the morning, is that they will go ahead, expedite the implementation. But they also argue that it comes with some safeguards. Of course, we've had time now to look at the fine print. When I look at this, what I would argue is that the safeguards have, in fact, been watered down to get this under the line. There are no mentions. At some point, this was floated, the idea of territorial integrity in the European Union, and all of this going back to the threats that President Trump made on Greenland and therefore also Denmark, a member of the EU. That does not feature. They do have a clause that says the Commission would have a right to suspend some of the parts of the agreement if we do not see tariffs and duties on steel and aluminum come down by the end of the year. Remember, they're now standing at around 50%. There has been no tariff relief on that front when it comes to the Americans on the EU. And they also say this could be suspended altogether by 2029. Of course, by 2029, President Trump will not be in offer. When I look at this, ultimately, the Parliament agrees in a very difficult context to move ahead, fearing that if not, that would lead to escalation and more tariffs by July. Ultimately, will this change anything about the fundamental core of the arrangement? No, the 15% of European goods will stay. And of course, the U.S. will still remain as a winner out of this, with industrial goods coming down to zero and promise by the Europeans to buy and spend billions on U.S. weapons and energy. The deal, the core of it, stays as it is. It is tilted in favor of the U.S.